Rocky Mountain locust. Bred on the short grass of the American plains, in the summer of 1875, it came off that grass in a mass that shut the sun out of the sky over Nebraska. Farmers watched one swarm pass overhead for 5 days, covering 198,000 square miles of the West. California would have fitted inside it with room to spare. 12.5 trillion insects were in that cloud, and their weight together came to 27.5 million tons. No gathering of animals anywhere on Earth has ever been counted higher. All of that came out of a strip of ground small enough to cross in a morning's drive. The insect bred permanently only in sandy river soil along the Rockies, on a home range put it somewhere between 3 and 3,000 square miles. Settlers turned that same soil with the plow for their own wheat. 1 square inch of broken riverbank could hold more than 150 crushed egg cases. Bodies from the great swarms are still frozen into the ice of Montana and Wyoming. One glacier there carries their name, and that ice is melting away. DNA read out of museum drawers and out of the ice marks the animal as a species of its own and shows no collapse in its numbers before the end. The last one, taken alive, was caught in Manitoba in 1902, and a single straggler turned up in Colorado 2 years after that. Prairie skies never carried a swarm like it again, though swarms on that scale still fly over Africa, where the desert locust pushes them much further. Desert locust breeds through the dry belt that runs from West Africa across Arabia into India, and in October of 1988, swarms of it went out over the open Atlantic instead. They flew 4 to 6 days without landing, 3,000 miles of water below them, and came down alive in the Caribbean. A single square kilometer of swarm carries between 40 and 80 million adults. That one patch eats as much in a day as 35,000 people. Most of its life, the insect keeps to itself, colored to the sand, feeding alone and staying clear of its own kind. Rain brings green up in patches, and the locusts crowd onto them. Once they are packed tight enough to knock against each other, fine hairs on the hind legs fire. Serotonin floods the brain, and the animal starts to turn. Within hours, the loner is bold, hunting out company, shifting toward the black and yellow of the swarming form. Sand that looks bare can hold up to 1,000 egg pods in a single square meter. Plagues of this locust were being written down in Egypt more than 5,000 years ago, and it is the same insect that strips the fields in the book of Exodus. The upsurge that ran from 2019 to 2022 was the worst Kenya had faced in 70 years, and the worst in 25 for Ethiopia and Somalia. Losses across the region reached $8.5 billion. Spray planes and ground crews working through it held back 4.5 million tons of crop losses and kept 41.5 million people in food. Wings carried that swarm across an ocean. The Mormon cricket has none, and it crosses the American West on foot. Mormon crickets move over the sagebrush in bands miles long, and a cricket that falls behind is eaten alive by the ones coming up from behind it. Hunger drives the whole band forward. Protein and salt are what the march is hunting for, and every animal in the column is a walking parcel of both to the one at its back. The name goes back to 1848, when the bands came down into the first crops of the Mormon settlers in the Salt Lake Valley. It is a shield-backed katydid, heavy-bodied and wingless, and it walks everywhere it goes. That same season, flocks of California gulls came in off the Great Salt Lake and ate the crickets off the fields. Utah raised a monument to the birds in 1913 and made the gull its state bird, though much of the harvest was already gone by the time they arrived. One infestation across Nevada in 2006 covered 10 million acres. Living bands still stretch up to 6 miles long and hundreds of acres wide. Crushed bodies leave the highway slick, and cars have gone off the road on the residue. During the outbreak of 2023, a Nevada hospital kept its entrances clear with leaf blowers, brooms, and a snowplow. The eggs can lie in the soil anywhere from a single year to 11 before hatching, so a valley can stay empty of them for a decade and then fill. In 2024, the state put forward a plan to treat 222,000 acres of public land from the air. That war started in 1848 and is never properly finished. These bands stay inside the American West. The migratory locust turns up almost everywhere else. Migratory locust lives in a basin in Xinjiang 150 meters below sea level. It also lives 4,600 meters up on the Tibetan Plateau. Between those 2 points sits the widest range held by any locust or grasshopper, running from West Africa to New Zealand. Crowded together, it changes color, shape, and habits so completely that the shy form and the swarming form were carried on the books as 2 separate animals. Linnaeus himself listed them apart.
Chinese records of its outbreaks reach back more than 3,000 years, to the age of the oracle bones. In the year 715, the Tang chancellor, Yao Chong, broke with the habit of treating swarms as punishment from heaven. He ordered night fires and trenching against them across Henan, warned all the while that he was calling supernatural punishment down on himself. A plague that began in Madagascar in 2012 reached the food supply of 13 million people, 6 in every 10 in the country. The campaign to put it down ran 3 years and cost $41.5 million. Its genome was read out in 2014 at 6.5 billion base pairs, more than twice the length of ours.
That was the largest animal genome ever decoded, and it held the record until the desert locust took the title in 2022. The two forms were only proved to be one insect in 1921, when the Russian entomologist Boris Uvarov showed that the quiet green grasshopper of the fields and the swarming locust were the same animal in 2 bodies. Outbreaks on that scale come round rarely. In the Karoo of South Africa, the brown locust barely takes a year off. Brown locust. Eggs lie in the dry sand of the Karoo through years of drought, and when a heavy storm finally soaks the ground, they hatch together, so that a bare paddock can be crawling by morning. In that semi-arid country, swarms needed active control in roughly 9 years out of every 10, right through the 20th century. The recognized outbreak zone runs to about 250,000 square kilometers of rangeland, almost all of it sheep country. That is more ground than the whole of the United Kingdom covers. Crowding rewrites the insect between generations. The solitary form stays small and drab. Crowded, the next generation comes out yellow and larger, up to 51 millimeters long. Hoppers hatch in dense bands that walk before they can fly, and a farm can lose its grazing before a single locust gets airborne. In the one season of 1985-86, crews are reported to have treated more than 250,000 separate hopper bands and 40,000 adult swarms. Before insecticides reached the region in 1945, swarms out of the Karoo traveled north as far as the Zambezi, more than 1,000 kilometers from the ground they hatched on. The swarms themselves stay modest for a locust, tens of square kilometers at a time. Major plagues arrive on something close to a schedule, roughly every 8 to 12 years, and the run before the latest one came in the season of 2010 and 11. By 2022, the outbreak crossing the Karoo was being called the largest brown locust swarm ever recorded. That one still stayed inside a single country's rangeland. For sheer ground covered, the Australian plague locust works on another scale. Australian plague locusts came up out of the mud after the floods of 2010. Within months, they were spread across roughly 500,000 square kilometers of the east of the continent, from Queensland down to Adelaide. Spain would fit inside that area. Australia had seen nothing like it for as much as 75 years. Each adult carries a dark blot at the tip of the wing and shanks of bright red on its back legs. Individual swarms that season were tracked over 300 square kilometers of ground, packed at around 10 insects to every square meter. 2 square kilometers of a dense swarm holds something like 1 billion locusts, and they strip 20 tons of green material in a day. The young hatch without wings and cross the paddocks on foot, in bands, until the last molt puts them in the air. Their long flights come after dark, when warm inland winds lift the swarms off the ground they hatched on and carry them as far as 800 kilometers, generally toward the coast and the grain country. Under good rain, the insect goes from hatching to breeding adult in about 10 weeks, so one wet season is enough to build plague numbers from almost nothing. The first plague on record there came in 1844, and 8 major ones have been counted since 1930. Even in ordinary years, the damage to cereal crops runs past 25 million Australian dollars, while every dollar spent on control has returned about 8 in crops that were never lost. Aircraft sprayed through the whole of that flood season, and the crop bill for those 2 years still came to 28.5 million Australian dollars.